In the name of Allah, Bashir is the merciful. I would like to welcome you here on this session where we will be discussing, and we'll have panelists, Dr. Marwan Al-Rashid, founder and executive director of Interface Company, and it's one of the startup companies that have achieved great success internally within Sudan and internationally. They are working in Djibouti, in South Sudan, and in Qatar. I would like also to welcome Mr. Ibrahim Bakhid, the General Director for National Information Center. Also, he has a very long track of experience in the IT, technical and management side within Sudan and in the United States of America. In both public and private sectors. Also, I would like to welcome Engineer Sarah Doka. She is a senior commercial manager at MTN, and also she's also segment manager at for multinational corporation. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Ghada Kadoda. Dr. Ghada is a university professor and independent researcher, and she has a long track of experience in fields that are related to ICT for development and also citizen science. Is currently in Sudan, we are transiting through a very historical period actually, and there are many opportunities introduced by the social, economic and political change that happened in Sudan. It has created a number of opportunities, and on the other side there are many challenges internationally and locally. If we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, coronavirus, and also the many lockdowns and crises during the recent years. So this is a chance for the ICT sector to create change and contribute greatly to the development of the economy and the society as well, and across the sectors. And these sectors can be in public or private sectors, private fields, and it can be like education, health, and otherwise. So the ICT now has a chance that to contribute to all these sectors and fields. And the most important thing is to enhance the livelihoods of citizens through providing interaction between citizens and decision makers, and be transparent in providing information and data, and also providing tools that help citizens improve their livelihoods. Here, in order to just like translate this on the ground, we need to know, or we need to understand the current situation, and we need also to know the proposed changes that can achieve our dreams and aspirations. In today's session, we'll discuss practical steps that we need to improve the telecommunication and ICT sector in Sudan, and this will include policy reforms and legal frameworks reforms, and also we'll explore the potential opportunities and the challenges in order to bridge the gap between the sector and the rights of citizens and the objectives of the December Revolution. The themes in this session will be the challenges on three, there will be three themes, three axes: governance, policies, and organizational structures. And the second aspect is creativity and innovation, and support for small and medium businesses. And the third aspect is the soft side of the IT, that's the digital softwares, provision of information, and digital gap between those who have capabilities and capacities and the other laymen, the rest of the population. Sometimes some people they face certain challenges acquiring and obtaining information and data, and also providing data and information to decision makers. I think the ICT sector will provide a lot in this respect. So also we'll just try to overview or survey the proposals and recommendations and solutions. If we start by challenges, we'd like to have Ustaz Ibrahim Bakhit, and he will tell us about governance and structures. So please tell us. We would like to know about the challenges you have at the International Center for Information. In the name of Allah, compassionate, the merciful, I'm very glad to be here in this forum within this knowledgeable team. Engineer Buthaina Imam, Engineer Marwan Rashid, Engineer Sarah Doka, and Dr. and Consultant Ghada Kadoda. I'm very glad to participate in this forum, and we are actually at the threshold of December Revolution anniversary, and I would like to salute the martyrs of the December Revolution, and I hope that we can move forward to build our Sudan. Actually, the challenges, our colleagues here, my colleagues here, they may know that living in Sudan, that one of the biggest challenges in Sudan for ICT sector is the environment. There are many environmental challenges. Telecommunications on one side and information on the other side. So these are big challenges for us. The biggest challenge for me personally is that this sector, in order to move forward, there has to be some support by government leaders, and I think there is support there. There is support on high level, and there is, but this sector actually, for me, this is it's a matter of finance challenge and funding challenge. So there has to be financial commitment, there has to be funding commitment, and there has to be a budget for the digital transformation. Even if we just confine ourselves to digital transformation in the field of IT, away from the telecommunications sector. Because telecommunications, the telecommunication aspect is, they have their own revenues where they can do some private businesses and operators there, and the authority, regulatory authority for telecommunications, they're all there. There is a challenge because we have come out of a crisis situation. Now people are just running after the bread and after their providing for their families and needs. So it's not necessary that fortunately there is now the markets now are open in Sudan, and I think there is a chance and opportunity that we can open up towards the private sector and try to seek help and support from the private sector, where the private sector will have guarantees and collaterals that they can help us develop. The environment during the past 30 years was inopportune. There were many challenges and lack of harmony between the partners, not only on the level of the military component and civil component. The environment, there was an environment of sub-organizations. Everybody is just confined to their own field, and I don't want to sound like a pessimistic, but the environment actually was very hostile, and even the collectors are the decision makers. So we act like as if we are just like collectors only, and collectors, they think they are most important persons, and there are also many other challenges. But I don't want to take too much time elaborating on this. Maybe we'll come back to this later during the discussion. So now I would like to stop here. Okay, Dr. Ghada. Thank you, Buthaina, and I would like to thank the Global Entrepreneurship Week and the IEC for hosting this discussion. Actually, I was very impressed by this group, and now I'm happy to be here in this activity. I would like to confirm what you said, that the new situation in Sudan, the new reality in Sudan, as induced by the December revolution, and here I salute the martyrs of December revolution. Actually, the information center at Madani, I think this will play a great role and provide a good vision towards the change we aspire and the change we need. The challenges, as Dr. Bakhet said, they are very big and huge challenges, actually. And I would like to talk about 2 points in the beginning. Undoubtedly, the ICT can accelerate economic and social development. Nobody can doubt this or dispute this fact. But its relation to human resource development, this may be, some people may dispute this. When you just come out from the Western eccentric perspective, the relation, we'll have to reconsider the relation here. So, because there are different models, and they have a relation to the public policy. So, there are 2 themes, actually, and 2 concepts as regards the ICT, the endogenous and exogenous. That means the external and internal aspects. You have to, there are 2 aspects for every policy. That is, it is a wide spectrum also. You should not be like exclusive or confined to yourself, but you have to differentiate between external and internal aspects of any policy, and know how to mix. The exogenous, which is the external aspect, focuses on the technology gaps, and people will be just running after new technology. The endogenous focuses on the information, the issues of information and data, which is in the end, that is also related to the people, to the human resource. So it will not be led by the market alone, or led by the human development alone. So these are new concepts in development, and the Human Development Index focuses on the people, on the human resource. So we should come out of the thinking where led by some types of institutions that are liberal, new liberal, and enter, and we have to differentiate between the information and knowledge, because the knowledge is owned by the people, and where they can sort out the information, use it and transfer it, and all these things, all these processes. In order for you to just have integrated information, so the capability is also very important. So how we can do it indigenously, and so we have to think about what do we have. then this will allow us to move to the policy aspect, and should be more practice-based, more community driven, and then we'll have to explore the approach and just try to explore the approach in a way that we make use of all the knowledge and experiences that are there. So this will help us greatly when we think on what pace are we going to devise our ICT policy. The other thing is related to the second subject, that is innovation. Innovation, when we look at from the technological perspective, innovation is not only for technology, but it's agriculture, health, and all sectors. As Dr. Bach said, the point that lack of harmony within the elements as regards the national innovation system, these elements is consisted of elements and relations, and the interaction between different people is very important actually, and stakeholders. And these stakeholders include the government, for example, and the government should have a great role, especially in this time, and the private sectors are, so research institutes are also there, and people, entrepreneurs who are doing the inventions, and those who are doing the adoption. There are incentives, there are regulations, and so on, and there is also the educational system, and also the enabling process. So one of the challenges that we can talk about later is the workforce, and how they can make use of the innovation, how they can introduce innovation, and how they can produce innovative projects. So we have to train them, and we have to qualify them through a clearly defined methodology, or through public education, or through higher education. And in our general education, our children should learn how to use the technology in the right way, the 2021 technology, and they have to be literate in technology, and they have to develop creative and critical thinking. When we come to higher education, we find that we have not prepared our workforce to do technically. Dr. Muhammad Al-Amin used to say that the structure of the higher education in Sudan is defective because it was built only on academic education and not on technical education. About 90% of the budget in higher education is actually confined to academic education. So I think we have to prepare and qualify the new generation in technical aspects, and we have this also will depend on the educational system for our future generations, and we have to teach them. The other aspect is the readiness of our system to accommodate the innovation and innovative ideas. I will talk about this later, but those are the areas I focus on. Just I would like to explain something about the indigenous versus indigenous. You mean that we should not import technology as it is? We should also explore our market and know our need and requirements, and then we will try to demand the technology we actually need. Absolutely, this is what I meant. We have to know, according to our demographic statistics, we have to explore how our people are using the technology, and how the capacity, what are their capacities, and accordingly we can just devise our programs, ICT programs, and technological requirements. There is also the aspect of ICT for development. We should be serious about it, and this use these demographics, and we should also adopt an equitable approach. We'll have to provide access to the technology to everybody and to all indigenously So we'll be using also we'll be having our local knowledge, and it should be like part of the package, and we'll be building on these things. Sarah, about the challenges and the policies and the structures that are just like facing you as the private sector in communication. I'd like to thank the IEC and the GEW for allowing the this forum to convene, and I'm very glad to speak here. Actually, recently we were talking about the ICT challenges in the private sector and in the telecom sector, but before I just touch on the subject, I would like to reassure, to confirm what was said by Mr. Ibrahim and Sarah Kadoda about the importance of ICT as a development factor or methodology. Now we are talking about top 5 economies in Africa. They are mostly allocating huge budgets to the ICT development. So I think this is a very assured way of development. And other thing is that we are thinking about to develop new markets and in the ICT and through the SM and for the SME projects, small and medium enterprises, because they build on the platform for the ICT. So I think Mr. Ibrahim raised an important point, and I do see it within the sector I work with. The involvement of decision makers in the ICT sector. I think the ICT sector has gone very far in encouraging creative ideas and innovative entrepreneurs, and but other sectors are still far away from getting involved. I think this is one of the. So if we are not working within the ecosystem on the same case, I don't think that we will be in factor value. So in the end, the private sector will be moving forward and other sectors will be lagging behind. So I think this is one of the things, real challenges that we are facing. One of the challenges also is the infrastructure of the ICT. Once we think there is investment that should be there for investment is very expensive in the ICT sector, but we will get the results and outputs at a later stage. So we are also we have been very much impacted by the sanctions, and now also by the lifting of those sanctions. So these are part of the challenges that we are facing. There are many challenges, but if you could focus on the dimension that our sector is not aligned with policy, with government policies and structures. So I think these are the main challenges. We have to adapt to the government structures. Just to comment on the governments and their readiness to invest. Now there is a G20 summit where they are talking about digital economy. This is one of the top three themes of the conference. So, God willing, this is where we will be heading. In the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, I'd like to thank you, Buthaina, for hosting me in this panel. And I'm very glad that I will be part of this. So I would like to approach this subject in a more holistic view within the same. I think the ICT sector is an enabler for implementing the vision of the government. So the government should have a vision So we'll have in 20, 40 years, we'll have the development, and I think this is the starting point. We have to have a vision within the government, so the ICT will enable the realization of the vision. And I think this is where comes the innovation and the human factor, as mentioned by Dr. Ada, and many things. And I think the first thing that we should, as it said by Mr. Ibrahim, I think the government should have a clear vision and a clear plan on how to move forward, and then we'll just like try to plan within the ICT sector, assuming that the vision is there, and the ICT will just set their strategy, and then you match your needs according to the policies. For example, the role of different organizations and any one of the other organizations. So this is a big picture. Whether they are regulators or they ensure that the technological expertise is there. What's actually the role of the different actors within the government structures? So this is my main message, that it's holistic, but I think the whole thing is subsection here. This is the biggest strategy, and then there are in alignment with the ICT, and in order to achieve the goals and targets, and then will come all the policies and procedures and so on. Mr. Ibrahim, do you want to comment on this? In this respect, I know that you have the national ICT strategy. Actually, our engineer here have a right to talk about these things. And now I can go back to what the doctor has said, that the challenges are there. يا أخي ما يوقفوا until now. So if the government, if we have just like make a central contracting system for the government, and instead of placing the money in a certain portfolio or anything, so we should place it within the system itself, and we'll have information and job descriptions and whatever for everybody to subscribe. So everybody will provide the service, and then we'll do some rating where we have the information rated and know if there is any malpractice or anything. It will become obvious and so on. So now we are partaking. We are doing some review of the law with the contract and purchases department, and also for immigration, review to immigration, and they have capabilities and capacities, and also the boycott and sanctions. They have significant impact on us. The culture that was there during the past 30 years also you cannot escape that. The culture was very toxic and based on corruption and lack of respect of people's mandate and mandates and authorities, and of mandates and authorities of other institutions. I think we have to do serious discussion in this respect, and everybody should sit and know their terms of references and their the boundaries of their authorities, of their mandates. I think this is a call for everybody to come forward and debate and discuss all these things without any claims or allegations or anything. So we have to know. So people who should be like protect the people that are doing business now. So we have to think carefully and honestly, quietly about these things, and we have to try to find a way out. So also I will have to come back to the issue of this digital transformation and its relation, as Dr. Al, she talked about the economic development and these things. So in order to explain these things, digital transformation in Sudan now, Sudan is not there on the global digital index, and we are not even, we don't have any presence there. Also, our status is very deteriorating. So why are we concerned with the digital transformation? So the digital economy represent in India 56% of the GDP, in the GDP, and they depend on the technology and IT, and also it is an economic power. So I have a simple experience here, like this fares, transport fares. Let alone the price or faring and transport fares. If you want to get if you want to a land ownership certificate, so we can see how we can do this through digital transformation. And if you have a capacity to pay more, we can just companies, they can deliver the certificate to you at your home. And if you want to stand in line and get the things, so just look at the time you spend and the effort you made, and how people and the absentees from work and these things. So when husband was just standing or staying in line at one place, and then will come back to his house, so by the wife or by his children, this will impact his psyche, and these are real things we are talking about here. It's not intellectual talk. There is a return, economic return and social return for this digital transformation. Our colleague engineer here just asked whether the government has a vision. I think the government is very concerned about having a vision for its sectors. Concerned with the National Information Center, it should be actually a national center where they can produce many initiatives, and they can just act as a hub for researchers and scientific researchers and students. So because information is the ownership of everybody, it's not for the government only. And the center also has a transformational strategy, but it was an old one, and it was made in coordination with the Koreans, and there is a big database. There are projects on the paper, so I think the Minister of Finance should review whether these projects are indebted or not. They have to show us, and how we found many projects on paper, and it's good. These projects are good, but the problem is the system is not updated. Now we have a democratic change, we have a new government, so we can try to develop, and we have certain issues of transparency. Elections are coming also, and these are priorities that were not the priorities of the defunct regime. So we have to do something in this, and we are actually carrying out a gap analysis in order to determine things. And now there are some external factors that require that we rearrange our priorities, and sometimes some projects we can delay, some projects we can just execute immediately. There are nothing about remote learning or distant learning, and there is nothing for the information role in the elections, in the coming elections, and who is entitled to vote, and who has ID number or personal ID number, So there are many allegations that some passports are not even issued in the proper way. So these are priorities we have to consider. But with all due respect, engineer, I'd like to go back to relate one story that I always relate. I was learning at the University of Qatar, and there was a professor, a Brazilian professor, and he taught us international finance. So he talked to us about financial engineering. He talked and hedging practices. And one day I asked him a question. He asked me, Ibrahim, do you know who are these economists? Economists are those who fail to do business in the market and then they come and do things theoretically. So we are not actually teaching you business. We are just giving you guidelines, and then you just go to the market and see what suits you and try to do your businesses. So you have to tell us what makes you earn money. I don't want to give you a project and ask you to work on it. I will give you only, we as National Center for Information, we just provide you with information. You give us, just try to introduce your project to us, and we'll give you the relevant information. The other option, which is the non-digital option, if you just like bring some projects to us, we can provide you with protection laws for our information and infrastructure for our information, and we can enter into partnerships with you, public and private partnership. So because I don't want to enter into risk. So if you are like a businessman, come. Sometimes we have individuals who are more successful than businessmen. So there is no risk factor here for the government as long as the information and ICT is concerned. So you can just implement and execute your projects. We'll give you the strategic plan, and that we need. In the end, we need somebody who can serve the citizens and provide solutions to the problems and crises. But what type of services, what type of business that is more suitable to you, that I think that's for you to decide, not for us. Only you come up with your approach us with your project, and we'll give you relevant information as per your needs and requirements. And I'm always telling these businesses and these things, I think we should organize a workshop where we can talk about things. Now we are living in a crisis, livelihood crisis, and even we don't have basic needs are not there. So I think this is the role of the private sector. And even internationally, the situation is in favor of the private sector as regards the open economy. And now we are also, it's very difficult to obtain or to just like attract hard currencies in investments, because it's very difficult in the IT. We have to do some positive differentiation, and we don't want somebody to come and just change, develop things here. So we want to localize the software production here in Sudan. And with these sanctions lifted, I think the ICT sector, even on individual level, will develop. And some people, they'll tell you that I have a website, I have a domain, and these things. So we can just like attract freelancers from India or from somewhere, and they can just design the website for you at $500, $600. $500, $600 is a real income here. So the freelancers, when they can also from here, our freelancers from here, they can deliver their services to the United States and in Europe. I don't want to take more time, but our door is open. We have the strategy, but I just consider it as guidelines. So when the international donors approach us, so we will give them the strategy and guidelines only in order. This is the same thing as for the digital gap between urban and rural areas, and that we have to reach out to rural areas. And it's not only about networking here in urban areas. So we have to make comprehensive coverage of networking coverage to all areas in Sudan. We need real services, actually. Networks are nothing if you don't provide services, real services. We need to do everything online. We have to have everything, all services online. So these are the services required. I think we'll come back to this issue, and I think I take more time than I should. So this is very good what you have said. This is a call to public private sectors and to establish a partnership. And now we'll talk about the investment plans. Companies are there, they want to invest, but they are facing a number of challenges. So let us see, Sarah, what about the private sector? I think Mr. Ibrahim said like almost everything. One of the challenges, as I said, I believe that the private sector is ready to participate in investment, but they need invitation and they need also they need real participation by all parties. There are decisions that issued, but I think if they consult with the private sector, telecommunication companies, they can just add value to the investment plans. And I think the other aspects is our readiness to act after the lifting of these sanctions. And I talk about the government components and government institutions at all levels. And if this is 100% reality, I think the private companies will be ready to participate, but the government has to be ready to accept the lifting of sanctions. I mean post period after the lifting of sanctions. I think this is one of the things that we should focus on, how the government sector is ready to participate and act. Also, regarding the communication with the private sector, if you are doing a strategic decision in a country where you have not involved or engaged the real market players such as the telecommunication and ICT companies, you are losing a very big portion of the market. So these are the main points that I would like to contribute. Marwan, the point I would like to touch on the point of readiness. I think it's very important. So commenting on as you said, Marwan, the private sector can source out their investments, so they can also manage their issues regardless of whether there are sanctions or no sanctions or whatever. And but the thing I touched upon recently or before, that and we need to push it forward. This is a strategy. We have to have a strategy in place, and I think it's very important that if one of your objective is the digital transformation within the next 5 years, you will have to focus on raising the competence of local private sector in order to achieve your objectives. If the strategy is readiness by the sanctions lift up, and if the market is ready, if we know how to use the sanctions issue and lifting of the sanctions, again, if the government is already involved in on this respect, and they are ready, so they can capitalize on the opportunities and know what type of technologies is needed for the sectors, and what competence should be there, and what type of companies they need to attract, and all this will lead to what you mentioned as an example for utilizing the procurement system for the government. So I think this aspect of sanctions is one of the things that impacted the private sector greatly. Everybody suffered in this respect, but the private sector was most incurred party. Also, there is the aspect of technology regarding the documentation support, the licensing, and these things. I think there are many opportunities ahead in Sudan, and there has to be alignment between the direction of the country and other sectors. I think the private sector, in the end, they need to earn profits and gains, and they can just explore the opportunities with the supply of hardware, of software. They are actually, in the end, they are seeking a profit, and private sector is a profit-making sector. But my comment was in terms of ICT as a holistic sector. As regards the investment, I think it's very important. I don't know whether the governments generally invest in anything. Maybe some of the infrastructure will be owned by the government, but encouraging big companies such as telecom to invest in the infrastructure and fiber networks, so I can, and based on this fiber networks, I can build some other things. So this is the bottom line of my pyramid. We have to do, if I want to do digital transformation, I need an internet access, I need high connectivity, and once I have this high connectivity, so I can build on all this or whatever I need to do. So I think these are the aspects I wanted to touch on. Doctor, do you have any comment on innovation and support of startups? I would like to just comment on what Moran just said. How much of what we have already in infrastructure, how much do we have? How much is utilized of our infrastructure? I think there is a percentage that I heard that is heard about, but really we are using only 15% to 20% of the fiber in our infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure. So the technology, some part of the technology is not utilized, and not utilized, that means there are other gaps. That's lack of content, for example, or lack of relevant content. This is a very important aspect, and this will just take us back to the economy should be an information-driven rather than technology-driven. When we have this information aspect, so we'll be thinking about the people and the services they demand and how they approach these services and in what forms they need them and what type of technology should be imported. So we need to be driven from bottom to top, and this way we can just design our strategies as per our demands and requirements. This is one point, and the other point that I would like to comment on is that about the sanctions. Once a small boy at the grade 2 or 1 or 2 and there was a workshop held by the National Center for Information, and on the theme of that workshop was how to deal with sanctions. So people talked, and some experts delivered certain speeches, and they talked about the subject, and they were acted like very. So this small boy just asked a question. He said that I think the issue is these sanctions. It's just like in your talks, like going around through the back door. But what about our loss? Our loss. What about the moral issues? We know how to go through the back doors all the time. So how could we change our code of conduct and our moral attitude? So I think we cannot imagine our lives without a sanction. So it has become a way of life. So we need to think not only in the opportunities, but on how to change the attitude. There should be no fragmentation in these discussions. The government should not hold separate talks with the private sector. So we need everybody on the table, the academia, and everybody should get involved. So if we try to let us have education and just like in order to have graduates that are able to innovate. So if you don't have, if you don't reform the access, if you don't reform the content, if you don't reform the research development, if you don't research all this, if you don't develop all these aspects, so this is a real issue. I'll give you an example here. Taken from this COVID-19 pandemic, there was no innovation approach. Many groups and individuals and companies and all kinds of people, they approached the Ministry of Health with certain proposals. Somebody they need to do some tracing up, others they need to do some dashboards, and others they want to just like manufacture masks and things. So the Ministry of Health, in my opinion, did not have the capacity to just transform these innovations into actual achievements, because they don't have interlink between them within the ministry departments. So, and they don't have any capacity to also accommodate or to just interlink these innovations. So if we do innovations, we have to get the government departments so that they can accommodate these innovations. So this is a very important aspect. What I wanted to say is that the academia, we need certain spaces, that's collaborative spaces between the academia. We should create spaces that engage the private sector, the government, with all its departments and units. And the National Center for Information can act as the leader in this respect. In order to, because they are the producers, and they have the solutions, they have the technical skill, they have the know-how, and they can produce something which is sustainable. And also they are regulatory bodies, and they can protect the rights of everybody and make things done or performed in a healthy environment. So let's start with a seed, at seed level, providing seed projects. So we know that we are not ready, infrastructure is not okay, and let alone this digital schools or this. How many schools do we have actually? So it's a problem. We have to have a proper infrastructure in place. We need all these things. We need to take all these things on board, and from here I think this will be a chance for us to map out the entities that can just like do the research, all parts of this innovation system, like research. We need to look at some structures and think through which we can think and try to do startups. There's a comment, a little comment on that, on what Ghada said regarding the human resource and the people. We in the private sector, I think one of the challenges we face the gap between the academia and the industry, and the readiness of the resource pools and the labor market. Actually, this is a very important point, and I think there should be a clear strategy in place on the highest level, because this is a very big gap actually between graduates and the real labor market. There is no linkage between their qualifications and the requirement and demand of the labor market. So also we have also to just like retain them from going abroad, because the ICT field and technology is very attractive outside. So we have to retain them here in Sudan, and I think bridging the gap between the academia and the industry is very important, and we should rethink about these things, and we should collaborate to bridge the gap, and we should have different approaches and focus by government departments, because this is the essence of development. If you have the all the caliber or human resource, that qualified human resource labor, if they went just immigrated, so they will create a gap, and actually it's a problem for the private sector. We should talk seriously, and maybe you are just facing the same issue or encountering the same issue in MTN. So I think this is we should look at these things and just like do some efforts to fix the problem, because the raw talent is there. With just a little polishing, we can qualify and train these cadres, human resource cadres. Very good, Doctor. Do you need to comment on this? Of course, of course, of course. This is the point I wanted actually to hammer on. This is academia and academic partnership. We have two experiences. And before rating them, I would like to talk about the retention inside Sudan. I think also we have to retain inside the ministries and inside the public sector, because people, they don't stay. There is no retention. ICT people, they leave the government, the ministries and government units to work in the private sector. So I don't know how to fix this issue, but I think also we should focus on the retention policies at government departments and government units. So whatever policy you have at the private sector, whatever projects you have, whatever strategies, we have very poor structures at the government. So also now I would like to talk about the local academia. It's not difficult actually. It needs some daring action actually, because you can. It's realizable. I mean, it's not something. It's doable. So we have a track of experiences in Sudan, and some companies are acting as incubators. There are different forms of experiences there, but within the university there is some type of sustainability, like the stable flow of people within the universities. So during the study period, if we just like try to reform our curricula and have them adapted to the requirements of the labor market. Now at the University of Khartoum, we are not teaching ICT for development as if we are living in Washington. So we should actually, we are just teaching things that they can use abroad. But this is okay, but we want our students to be qualified, but also we have to localize the things according to our needs. Have to localize our curriculum according to our needs. So we should not say that they should not do this, they should not read this, they should not learn this and this. But also our universities should give the students a chance for training. They should undergo training after graduation, and then that where they work on real issues, real problems, and try to provide solutions to such issues where the stakeholders can train them, so the innovation gaps on the university level should be bridged. So we have to have a small innovation hubs at our universities, so that the students can just will not be just confined to their discipline, academic discipline, but they can learn other things. So we need to have like a broad perspective. Our students, we need them to have a broad perspective and discuss things and debate issues outside their disciplines, academic disciplines. So we worked some innovation. We taught some innovation at the University of Khartoum and in other places, but I think there should be a strategy for innovation all across the universities. So students will have, university will have information units and we move forward. So this is one aspect. There is extra curricular activities. There are extra curricular activities that can be introduced in the curriculum, where students will work on practical problems and issues and develop critical thinking and innovation to resolve these issues and problems. There is service, community service learning at Ahfad University, for example, and Faculty of Agriculture, but still we don't have it in the ICT sector. Or fields, people should go down to the community and try to solve the community issues and problems. And here they will be faced with practical issues actually, and they have some problems like lack of knowledge, lack of connectivity on community level, and so they know what are there, and they'll just like try to see things on the ground. This is very good. There is one question, live question from the student, but before responding to this question, this will open the next theme of open data and these things. I'd like to comment on what Marwan said, and also would like to have your comment, Mr. Ibrahim, how the company can crowd in and can invest in infrastructure, so and open investment opportunities for more companies to participate where there is a bottom line requirements. So now we understand that there are many challenges facing our transitional government, but maybe it will be easier for the governments to have long-term loans from development banks and from international institutions, more than can be obtained by the private sector. So how are you ready? And what are your plans in this respect? Is this an area that you are interested to get or to get involved in, or you see there is a feasibility for this for entering into this area? Okay, so this is a very good question. And before responding to, I think I would like to comment on some things what said by Dr. Ghada regarding the infrastructure. There are many data centers here, and there is infrastructure, but for the government to own such infrastructures, it's very difficult. I think it will take time. If I tell you that we are talking from the telecommunication companies, some information and from the CBS or from the comprehensive, we take 2% of the readiness of the companies, so that the companies will invest in bridging the technological gap between rural and urban areas. The strange thing is that the government buys connectivity, but when the infrastructure is there, it goes back to one company, one private company, or private company. So it will be owned back by these companies. So instead of leasing or renting these things, these services, the government will rent out to companies. So this is one thing that we need to look at. The abundance in infrastructure like electricity. For example, there is they have the energy and electricity. They have fiber which is 24 silicons, and also uh, and silicon, they have very large infrastructure that's not utilized. As to the academia, I would like to tell you that the National Center for Information, they have a software uh, programming center and the incubator where young persons are working in, and there was a lot of movement and a lot of activities there, and they are working on real projects with students, with young students, and they are doing a lot of work. And the last project I witnessed was interaction between midwives and pregnant women, just giving them information about the corona pandemic in order to just like reduce risk. And there are many partnerships. When since I came, I have signed 3 partnership agreements. One with the Azhari University, and I sat with them in many conferences. There is a Connecticut University, many American universities, and there is artificial intelligence projects there. And there's also they wanted to approach the atomic hospital. I invite you to come and see the local software section, and there's engineer Abdul Qadir who is very active in this field, and I think they have also a partnership with some incubators within the University of Khartoum, and one in the administration affairs manager. They have certain partnerships with some incubators. Now I forgot the question, and you just provided me with the question. I'll go back to it. Talking about retention of employees and these things, I think the government sector does not provide any benefits. We in the National Information System, I think this ecosystem is a very strange thing. I came to this center, and engineer salaries is less than the salaries are very less at the center, because we have bills not yet settled. So the situation is very hard, and actually it's not convenient. But also we look forward that this National Center for Information will act as a hub for information, and we'll have our people just sitting. Now we are working in this center. Now there are many issues regarding this, are surrounding this center. These people, they are not part of any information management or any aspects. They are just sitting there. In my opinion, I think we should be such as the accountancy departments. We should do analysis. We should work on the projects, and we have to actually develop this center. And we should get support from civil society organizations and private sector companies, that they can just like delegate engineers from the telecom and oil industry sectors, and in the Bank of Sudan, all these parties are ready to send engineers for 1 year. They can work with the National Center for Information, so the center will be able to develop. I think there is a support on higher level at the cabinet and the private sector, that we can move forward and try to develop our National Information Center. And I think people should be patient, because the center being dependent on the Minister of Finance is not feasible. So the company, do I pay, or am I supposed to pay? Because they give me lease about 9 billion for a year. This is in rent. I pay that. At the same time, I found there was a court judgment uh, granting a company that was staying in the same building since 2018. So people were there, and we cannot just expel them. But now with this democratic change, they notified us that they need 1 week to vacate the premises after the police took a warrant, arrest warrant to them. So the situation is very difficult there at the center, and it's very difficult to proceed and try to develop your capabilities and do some capacity building. I think most of our employees, and they are passing through very difficult circumstances, and also they need transfer of expertise and knowledge from private sector, and that's why I told you that the board of directors, because I think ministry undersecretaries are very important, but it's also important that we have certain academicians and some advisors from the private sector where they can give us information and guidance on how to develop our center. And they don't have to disclose anything, but they have to participate in researching and in helping us out. I have two minutes more. So I talked previously about the difference between knowledge and information, and I think the next theme is I'll talk about data and information. But I think it's very important that we start with the information that is there, because the information cycle, information has a life cycle. Actually, they don't die, but they have a life cycle. They're starting with like the separate data, and then we collect the data, and then we collect more data, and we just piece them together, and then we will just try to interlink this data and information and try to come out with certain results. If there are any gender gap, for example, if there are any gap between the income for same male and female individuals, and so we can analyze the information and data to come out to have certain outcomes and outputs regarding the individual income and these things. So in order to have insight, so this insight will be transferred into knowledge, and from this knowledge, when we start, I can talk, because we have agreed information basis, and there will not be any debate about whether the women situation is harsher than that of men, and accordingly the knowledge will just like be rationalized, and then we will not be like barricaded in our political positions. We'll just all our actions will be based on solid information. Otherwise, we'll just be holding conferences and seminars while lacking information, and there will be some ideological barricades, everybody, and there will be problems. So we need actually to start making use of our information and data, and build a solid infrastructure, data infrastructure. So now we are talking about marginalized areas, we are talking about political issues, we are talking about government expenditure in the states and these things. So if we have all this information, we will start debating them, and nobody will just like wage a war or battle against somebody. So with availability information available, we can have a very convenient political and environment. So if you don't have accurate information, actually the output will be inaccurate. I think we should go along this line. There is a question, live question: how many multinational corporations are there in Sudan? So this question, I'm addressing this question to Sarah, but I think this will open up, this question opens up a good chance, as said by Ibrahim, that the challenge of obtaining information and the information impact on private sector, academia, and government sector. I don't know whether Dr. Sarah you want to respond or not. Let me start with what you mentioned last regarding the decision making based on data. I think this is one of the challenges that maybe we missed during the listing process, but it's still a challenge. So if it's a private sector or government sector or NGO, I think we are really doing decision making based on the best scenario, the best on experiments and trial and these things. But there is no real place or depository where the depository for database or for data, or there is a database so that we can base our decision on them. So we don't have best analysis, we don't have market researches in the proper way. So we don't have real accurate information actually, because we have to see whether they're actual market research or from the researcher's own perspective. So if you talk about this as challenges, now we are doing some decision making on non-accurate data. So we can go back to the question regarding the if we are looking at NMCs, we are looking at segments. You are looking at the MNC in what respects? For example, we are taking the NGOs and charity organizations and government organizations as NMC. The investment companies also are considered as NMC, or multiple companies with multiple real presence. We can call them NMC also. If you, unfortunately, some inaccurate information, as per my sources at the commercial register or the investment authority, or on my database of private companies, the real number of I cannot tell you the real number, but when we look at things like segments, we look at the NMC sectors. We have to look at the domain rather than approaching it holistically. Marwan, do you have any comment on this lack of data for decision making? As Sarah mentioned, we in the private sector, we have our decisions based on gut feeling. So we are based on gut feeling only in taking our decisions. So, and this is not the ideal way, but I suppose Sudan is the place where you don't have any other options. So this data issue and decision making based on data, I think this is extremely important. And for us, maybe our production is less than the government, because the government is responsible for people, is responsible for many things. So this is something really we need to focus on during the coming periods, starting from the data collection, storage, data storage and analysis. So there will be data stored for all sectors, whether private, NGOs, public sector, and otherwise. They all need data, and I think this is extremely important. Any comment, Doctor, for this data issue? Dr. Sarah? Actually, we have a small committee that we help the Ministry of Education in developing the use of the ICT in education. These are the three objectives that we do: that quality, equity, and access. So for students and on also teachers level and everything, we can never really find out if we are not following the students through his learning years. We can never really reach the goals if we are not following the students. Lack of data is an issue, and we will not be able to report. So we have reduced, if we don't bridge the gap between the different regions in Sudan, or if we did not try to do just like gauge or measure the equity standards, if we don't have this atomic data, we will not be able to do anything. What I see is that data is very fragmented in Sudan, and what is going on now, what is being used, is the old data that was old census that have been done. So this needs to be developed in order to reach the atomic of the things. So this is a very large data that you have to explore. Also, there is a lot of work there, and I think, in my opinion, we should start by just trying to fix this fragmentation of data. And I know that where the Ministry of Education has the 2 years information, because everything is fragmented, so we have to have the data consolidated and just work in collecting this data and try to store them in one place, and where we use them as a standpoint actually to build on for the future, in order to read that, just like to measure the trends and other indicators, whether in the market or at the on government level. So it is an area that I think is very important. We as academia, I think we should work hard on this data aspect, on this data arena. Could you believe that there are not many faculties and colleges that talk about or teach information systems? There is IT, there is computer science, there is software engineering, there is hardware engineering, but information systems in the literal sense, which is our real situation here, we have a problem with that. And accordingly, when we think about growth and development, it has to be an all-right solution that is built on each other. This is good. I think the 2 points that we did not touch upon is the digital rights. I mean, the right to access digital information, and gap in the digital technology. And if you talk, and then we can just sum up what we have debated, and we can, if there are any practical solutions we can agree on and come out with. Marwan, the floor is yours. I wanted to comment on this information issue. I think I would like just to bridge the gap here and try to give a close look. We had a seminar and workshop where Mr. Manis addressed that seminar. Dr. Manis addressed the seminar and says Sudan is informationally anemic. I think there is an anemia in Sudan as regards the information. Let's give an example here. I think most people understand these things, and they can just teach it. But in order for laymen to understand what I am saying, for example, actually we had meetings with university professors at University of Khartoum, such as Professor Muntasir, and Solutions for Sudan group and energy teams. And just like we tried to think about how to solve this petrol crisis, And so in order just to show how this information availability is a problem, so now we see that the government has no capacity and they should not actually provide subsidy to any fuel and or bread, and they should provide subsidy to those who are entitled to subsidy. So the government should move from subsidizing petrol to subsidizing transportation, and from subsidizing flour to subsidizing bread. So if we look at the requirements, if we have information, for example, if we look at the bread, for example, there was a proposal by the Solutions for Sudan group. They said that our flour is being smuggled, and our petrol is also being smuggled to abroad, across the border. And some people, they just like they sell the petrol and the flour in the black market. So if you just sell the 1 gallon at 1,000, so the citizens will not do agriculture. They just start selling the petrol in the black market and flour in the black market. So now if we talk about transportation, so in order to just like end this petrol line, let us sell the petrol in the open market, and we need the citizens actually to get their living requirements at cheap rates. So if we have, or they want them to move and just like have transport at a very low rate, so we'll have to have a system that like a tracking system for all buses and coaches. We should know the mileage of the coaches and buses, and just fit certain tracking devices on this transport means, and we will know from the engine capacity, how much petrol they need, and so we'll issue them with petrol. And so whenever we know they have transported certain citizens to at a fare that is not agreed upon, so they'll have vouchers that the Ministry of Finance can compensate the drivers. And the same thing should apply to the bread issue. We have 10 pounds fare and 2 pounds fare. So everybody is entitled to, every individual is entitled to 230 grams per day. So if I have a family of 10, that they need 10 bread, so she is inviting us for, so they'll give her the 10 for the family requirement, and she'll have to pay extra for the bread she needs for her guest or whatever. So we should have this method. So if the Minister of Finance is repaying you, so they will not have any interest in actually moving their vehicles or transport means, or just like producing bread or anything, or making bread. So we should unify the rates. So lack of information in this respect, even the transport means are complicated. We are the National Center for Information. We don't have ID. We don't produce actually ID certificates from at our center. So I think we should have a single window for information. We should have a networking, single networking for everything, central networking, and we should have other related activities also linked to the center, and we'll have the geographical domain, so we'll have the infrastructure there and infrastructure plans, and we'll have all information from everywhere: education, health, mosque, and churches. We'll do mapping out of all information and data in Sudan, and then we can share it with other people. But unfortunately, one of the things that we are facing is lack of a centralized information system. I think this is very important. The Minister of Finance should should not give any technological budget to any ministry. So these ministries, they buy the same systems, while it is the same system. So if the Ministry of Finance channel this money through or budgets through the National Center for Information, we could have do some networking and save a lot of money and provide services, IT services to all ministries and departments, and have a centralized center for information. So this is incurred loss of money and loss of effort, and sometimes people they buy devices that are not compatible. So it's very important that our center have a centralized channel for information. Now, if you ask me how many students are there at schools, so if I go to Ministry of Education, I get different number and different figure. I go to some other places, I get a more different figure. So this is a real issue. So if you are the governor of the Bank of Sudan and you don't know how much hard currency you have in store, so I think I'm talking emotionally here because I'm facing these problems and issues on daily basis. And I worked in the American customs, for example. Sometimes there is when I survey the American systems, I'll see some conflict between Trump and another official. So they'll say that this Republican issue is so and so. So the Democrats, such as happening here now, they are telling us that there is transshipment and these things. Now, by the end of the day, we need you to provide us data on something from 1955 up to now, or the information 2 years prior to the decision and 2 years after the decision. So we'll give them the data. So sometimes they will also ask me that somebody was smuggling medicine from Canada, tranquilizers from Canada. So we need some information, data about all envelopes delivered to this or addressed to this, delivered to this person. So we'll give them. So we have all this. We can just take out information. So now we have our brother Madan Abbas. They cannot provide us with information about the status of flour or petrol, and everybody thinks that nobody thought of this before, and whether this information and data is not sourced through the National Center for Information. So I think we have ministers there in the United States that they have a dashboard in front of them where in the United States we export wood from Canada, and we can just view how many trucks were there and what is the estimate for the next year. Everything is, you can see just immediately. Now we have people here. So the information, I'm dealing with this information issue. I think my success or failure depends on one issue. If I have an information bank here and dashboard for every minister and information provided to researchers and decision makers, I think also we will have to be compliant with rules and regulations as regards privacy and protection of privacy. I think this is a very good project and that we can work on. Okay, let's go back to, there's another question from the live. To what extent is the government open to partners and international private businesses to foster the sector? To what extent the government is ready to establish partnerships with international private companies so that they can come and invest in Sudan? The other question also I asked before is whether the government is ready to invest in infrastructure. Because it's easy for the government to obtain long-term loans. Is easier than available to the private sector. Also, the private sector always gets loans at a higher rate, and so if we need infrastructure, so the live question is whether the government is ready to strike partnerships with international private companies. So I cannot talk about on behalf of the government, but as within my authority, as within the National Center for Information, I think I can say that it's very important that we do some localized software production, and locally it's known that under the defunct regime there was no production of software locally. But if an external investor approaches us, so we'll have certain conditions that they should have a local partner. So I said that I don't need somebody to come and try to enter into disputes with us, and they'll tell me I don't have the soft code, and somebody will come there, and so we don't need somebody we can spend on. Just somebody, in order to change the code, will come from abroad and incur money on us, expenses. So we have to have some positive differentiation for startups and small entrepreneurships, and actually female-owned companies. So we have to localize our manufacturing companies, and we have to support the vulnerable groups. And I think this positive differentiation is very important, and this is something we have to amend our laws and do some legal reform in order to do things. And without doing some general dynamics and these things, the government will know. So questionnaires and these things, and minority-owned business and women-owned business and these things, they have certain percentages, and it's internationally known. So we have to think about developing different segments in our community, and we have to act in a fair way. And if there is like certain minorities, they have a right, actually they have a percentage that so if you need an IPN, they'll give you a contract. So I think this is one of the important issues that for us, for the youth entrepreneurs. I have seen very talented youth entrepreneurs in this country, but they don't have any opportunities. We have to provide them with opportunities so that they can act actively and prove their capacities. And actually, these young entrepreneurs should just enter into partnerships with each other and provide us with their projects, and I promise that we will support them. We don't have any time to take risks, but we will do our part in providing them with infrastructure and information. That is so we'll provide them with services. So if you provide me with fiber in Al Junaina and Al Ghafsha in Western Sudan, how do I use this fiber? So I need the services in universal access. I need it. It's not only hardware, it's service also. So it has to be available to the citizens. I think the government, it has it, but unfortunately they have owned this one and gave it to certain companies, gave it out to be owned by certain companies. I think this is our property, and we should have actually owned this infrastructure. I also think that utilizing the fiber by other government departments is very important, because it just creates a type of balance. Private sector, what do you think about what Ibrahim just said? And there is a question for you as well. The risk of external investors and your requirements. I think the advent of external investors, I think, will create very good opportunities for local companies. I think it is a two-edged weapon. It is a threat to local companies when I have an investor, external investor, who is very competent and has experience and exposure, so they have good chances to with the tenders, and maybe they don't want to work with local companies, so the business footprint is a threat. But opportunities in comparison is the provide access to information, access to experience, and collaboration nature of what Ibrahim said about policies. When I have an external investor, so I put a condition that they should work with a local partner, so there is a knowledge transfer between the international investor and the local companies. So this is not new, it's not novel actually. Some countries around us, they have these conditions and rules, and in order to guarantee that the knowledge transfer goes smoothly to their local companies. But I think the opportunities are more than the threats, and I think this is positive, because I think Sudan has incurred a lot of damage due to the sanctions, especially with regard to technology, and I think the opportunities will be great. But only we need some collaboration between all parties and stakeholders, and we need some vision and alignment from all parties and stakeholders, and we need a drive by the government as regards the legislations and rules and policies in order to guarantee the change required. Sarah, I think Marwan reminded me of something very important, that is the international companies that are entering. We are looking at this as an opportunity, investment opportunity, but this will also create telecom readiness of government access. So part of this is related to regulations and in point the Data Privacy Act. So once you open up and you open the content, open up the content and data, your data to international bodies, you don't know who is looking at the data and who is obtaining the data and who's taking away the data, whether it's sensitive data or not. So I think if there is no discussion about the Data Privacy Act and the advent by external investors, I think this is a time to do it. Also, we have to do some matching between the system and processes and regulations for the external investor companies and what type of information they need. And yes, we want them to drive the economy, Sudan's economy, and we want them to be part of the development and IT development. So we need to know who is coming to us, who we are welcoming in our economic house. And so I think this is a very important point. I'm talking as a Sudanese citizen, not as a telecom expert. And I think this is a great collective responsibility that we should work to ensure that whoever we work with has the right intentions. And it's definitely an opportunity, and I see it as an opportunity, and I think the whole industry looks at this as opportunity. But the information that we are not talking about and the discussion on that, I think, is the key issue. I'd like to just my telephone was in silent, and my telephone was in silent. So sorry, when you put it in the emergency status, it rings. Doctor, do you have any comment on the external investor companies and from an academic point of view and readiness of its human resource? I think there will be some technical issues that we have to talk about regarding the the use of personal information, because some people just everybody will collect the data they needed. And I'd like to say something about these development sectors. When there was a question about corporations, I think the NGOs they are big data collectors in the countries. They collect the data and set certain indicators and show us the outcomes. I think there's a problem of data ownership. So these multinational companies sometimes they overpower they overpower through the money they spend. They overpower the market and the local companies. So they do projects here. So they need complete data sets. And if you look at the ministries that they are collecting data, you will find this is one of the warehousing that we have to do for the data, for storing the data. As processing data and dealing with data, I think also is a challenge, and it's a very big process that we have. I think the accessibility also, we'll talk about the accessibility, Mr. Ibrahim. Okay. Go ahead, talk about accessibility. Like data as a national asset, public asset is something else. Is the national asset, that means you want to sell. Public asset, that means the accessibility is a right. So these are different perspectives here. I'm not just like my things are not arranged in a proper way. I wanted to tell Dr. Back at something. I was working in at one university in UK, and it was responsible for hospital entry statistics, and they were working on quality assurance for hospitals and waiting list and beds and the hospital episode and everything, because the health system in the UK is a very good system. So is there any possibility that a national body will do some control over government performance? Now we see that some people, they are just like they move, transferred from one job to another, and we don't know on what basis they have been transferred from one job to another. So the transfer has to be part of the data development process. So evaluation has to be part of the data processing. So I should know to what hospital I should go, what are the facilities there, to what school shall I send my child based on the information provided. Universities can also be part of this effort, and together with the government institutions, more than with the private sector. So I would like to just mention this example. I believe that open data is a good choice or good option, and I think we should walk along this track, at least with certain parts of the data that should be open. They should be open access to, and because we want to empower people. And I also would like to talk about the bottom of the pyramid, as mentioned by Marwan. I think this is a very important aspect, and I'll give a very simple example that when we do the ICT policies, I think we have to look at how people look at the issue. But I'll give you an example that should be gender-based. So we have to have our ICT policies there should be some gender specialists at the National Center for Information in order to have these policies to be gender sensitive. When we talk about poverty, Also, poverty impacts people on different levels, and women are at the bottom of this impact. So we have, when we have to the barriers, look at the barriers. So there is illiteracy, and some vulnerable groups are more impacted than others. So even if you provide me with network at my village, and you provide the contact to me, so my time is less. I can spend less time on the ICT, on the internet, and I probably have less capacity to buy a good computer or device. And this also will include the laws. So as well, like digital harassment and these things, cyber laws, we have to have cyber laws in place. And there is gender sensitivity. I and you are not the same, so I should have some type of protection that consider this aspect. Doctor, when I set national strategy of the right, so that people should protect the privacy. Other than that, but I think it's very interesting what you mentioned regarding, for example, at any time I work, there are two trainings. That is protecting the privacy and gender-sensitive data and harassment, sexual harassment, and all these things. This is annual mandatory, actually mandatory guidelines. At any time, if you just breach these guidelines, then you will not work anywhere. And the purpose of all this manual and guidelines is that you pass, because if you just commit any crime or anything, you should not say that I don't know. Every year you'll have to pass all this code of conduct and these things, and then it's very important this issue of awareness and spreading awareness regarding this is when you have protection of data and you have training and other things. So I think this is very important. And also the laws are very simple. If you have access to the information according to your position, so there is no problem. I think the open data applies to government data, actually. That is government-owned information and data. That means citizens have a right to get access to this. So now, for example, if I regarding the salary for Dr. Ad and this, I can get access to, but this is not my right to know about somebody's salary or something like. But general statistics and public statistics that I can get. I would also like to mention something, Doctor, that you talked about the gender and gender sensitivity. I think is most important in software manufacturing, that we should. Today I wanted to talk with our team that they should set certain standards for software manufacturing and licensing applications on mobile and these things. We should talk about the disabled persons with special needs. We should just like give them some space, and we have to just like set certain conditions, certain legislations and regulations for them. So now we go back to the ownership, data ownership and government-owned data, unless it's confidential or private, so it should be available to everybody and everybody should have access to. Now we have like telecommunication companies, they have a big depository of information, so it's their right to have certain regulations that protect their customers' private right. If you have any comment, Dr. Sarah, you can. The best thing is that the private telecom sectors they are very particular about regulating the data and privacy, protecting the privacy of their customers. So who should we release the data to? We do regular audits and our data teams. They make sure that our data is not misused. We are not selling it. We are not giving it to the wrong parties. So the data is saved. I remember that one of the clear regulations we have, and we usually audit, that the data should be within the same country. We cannot transfer it to servers outside the country, because this is an information for national use. And see, like the SIM registration, that you have A to Z information about any person. So if you are taking this information outside the country, then it's not mandated in the license, and it can create a lot of issues, and maybe it can revoke the license of the company. So these are one of the regulations that this was drafted or has been drafted properly. No company in the telecom industry, every company has a team of compliance that they are looking at compliance when you open up the country to new investors, and when this thing is not based on specific sector, and if there are telecom regulations, that depends. When we go to other sectors, maybe Marwan can give us some overview about the other sectors and whether there are some regulations like this in place or not. When we're talking about the public companies enlisted in stock exchanges, so the access to data for operators and number of revenues and these things, so they'll be available to everybody because you have shareholders from the public domain. We as private sector, we don't have this thing. We don't have any visibility for data. Sometimes people should not know the revenue of the company. They should not know the shareholders unless you ask for this information. You are doing some audit or some registration in some place. So as a private sector, the information that concerns us, if there is the depository of players and in which place they are working. So these are very important information. Sometimes we find that the company working in the PR system, some companies working in the mobile device trading. So you, in private sector, sometimes you need access to these companies, either to collaborate with them or do business with them. So you are not. So these are information, and this is a very difficult to obtain. So we know it personally through our contacts. So we know that Busaina maybe she has a software mobile company, and then we'll know she has certain things. And Sarah, for example, a website designer or something. So this is a basic level of information that we have need in the private sector. We need some sort of depository where we obtain the information and data of service providers and all companies working, like bottom line information. And I think this will help the incoming of the international companies. So when they come, foreign investors, when they come here, they actually looking for one central hub where they can get all the information and data required. So if the central authority, they don't have the basic information, so they cannot just like group these companies, investing companies together in one pool. So I think this is the most basic level of information for us as private sector is important, but there are other things that we need, such for decision making, such as information about if I want to do some new products or new service, so I will have to do some assessment on what revenue I can get if there is no database or information for me, so it can show me my potential customers in order for me to build on it. So the decision making in this respect will be very difficult for me. And also central database is very important issue, because sometimes you have information that are not related to ICT. but there are certain information about where people live and these things. So from this data, I can just like look at the data and seek them some other place, and the data will give me information that there is a gap at certain place. So I'll try to target and market my product at that area. I think this data issue and data coverage, I think, is very important, and we have to back this database, information database. Who do you recommend for a startup of the database, establishing a database? Can it be like a partnership between the public sector and the private sector through the National Center for Information or the General Companies Registrar? The company, I think it will be like a partnership between the public sector and the private sector, and this way we can talk. I think it's very thorny issue, and even in developed countries there is a lot of discussion about ownership of the data and these things, but I think partnership between the public and private sectors is attainable and is possible and can have very good outcomes. And because in some certain areas the government will be very solid, very strict as regards the regulations, controls, supervision, but as to the data collection and these things, the private sector can act, can play a very vital role. So sometimes we'll ask them, we need some startups like that in this certain number, and then we can just like have a national project sponsored by some governmental organizations or any other company, but the benefits will be enormous for all stakeholders and partners and market operators. So such partnerships, I think it will succeed. So this is the first outcome of the processes. There are two things now. There is open data and access, right of access to information, and also there is also privacy protection, the right to privacy protection and the data governance in general, which is a great part of private data protection and privacy protection. I think we should have laws, draft laws that guarantee the protection of private details. Also, there are also some security sensitive information, and this is related to another system. So we need governance of information, and we need something on a broader, on a level that is broader than the just protecting personal data. So now I have like something like in Taha al-Hussein, for example. Mr. Taha al-Hussein, he was the earpiece for the president, and the next day he was a person of different nationality. So here, this is a problem. You need some system of clearance for people to get access to certain security information and to certain confidential information. So this is a big crime. This was a big crime, actually. So this should teach us how to have a clearance system and classification system and provisioning system, whereby that we'll have to control access to the data at certain levels and certain authorities, certain mandates. So I am here for 5-6 months. I cannot talk about certain information as director of the National Center for Information, because due to my mandate as general director, I cannot talk about certain information. So this is part of the training that I underpass, and so this governance of information is bigger than the issue of protecting personal information. So the other issue also, the toxic environment created by the defunct regime. I think this is one of the issues that we should talk about. That is very surprising that people are using the information to get money out of this information, when a government department needs some information from another department, so they pay to get the information. So what type of dealing is this? So this is some government departments selling the information is very strange. It's very bizarre. So I understand that you can do some development for your system and that you can just provide this data and information to the private sector. So if we know the bids and the companies participating in tenders and these things, and who provides yellow paper, so we know all about our suppliers and these things. So we do the classification and like that, and somebody wants to bid from the private sector and ask us. So we as government can do some rating system and give it to the private sector. But for the government, we can just give them the information, release them at a price, at rate. But for from one government department to another government department to levy or to impose fees and these things, this is unimaginable. So that environment was very toxic. That was created by the de facto regime, and this takes us back to the culture. This is for the drivers, or for the bus boys culture, that people, they need money for everything they provide. So we have to develop our systems, actually information systems, but there are certain things that we have to pay regard to. So the government has a right to sell information to the private sector, but there is certain balanced processes that has to be there. There is a common benefit. So somebody who is in the decision making with a decision making mandate, so they have to get the information. That's right. So we need policies. We need a policy reform in this respect. Yeah, we need policies, and we need to reform the regulations. Unfortunately, now we are about to, our time limit is coming to an end. There are many points actually that we didn't discuss, but now I'll just try to sum up essential points, and then if somebody wants to add something, we can just listen. We talked about the environment and having unified structure for the ICT sector. Also, we talked about the challenges, budgeting challenges, and allocated budgets by the government, and the national Center for Information call to the private sector that they should enter into partnerships. We also talked about a clear vision by the government, where as represented in the National Center for Information, and now I think there are certain guidelines for this vision, and I think the government and startups can get involved in detailing this vision. We talked about our readiness environment for after the lifting of sanctions and the delisting of Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism. They need to be certain processes and policies in place, and qualified and trained human resource cadres. Also, we talked about the evaluation and assessment of available infrastructure and to what extent is being used, and that was interlinked with what Dr. Ada mentioned about the external and internal and the local content, and the creation of local content, and how to use the infrastructure. And I think this is a good area where startups can operate within, and it's open to creativity and innovation, and it's not that costly. Also, we talked about the collaborative pieces. The National Center for Information, they have something like that, and I think also we talked about accommodation of innovation by the government. Also, we talked about the academic cooperation between universities and research centers, and also we talked about education and whether that education should actually include awareness about the data and information. Also, we talked about creating opportunities for young generations. Also, we talked about the lack of information and data, and that data being fragmented, and And this will start like the data collection and involvement of many parties. And the last proposal, what was that for the companies, and also applies to the information sector, that the national public assets and how to deal with the information systems at universities and how to train the students and human resources. Also, we talked about the disabled and vulnerable groups, how to get them involved and included. Also, we talked about universal servers and how to provide services to the bottom of the pyramids. These are the points actually we talked about. Now I'm giving the floor to every one of you, so if you have certain concluding remarks, you can deliver. I'd like to thank you for this interesting discussion. I think you have covered all the points that we discussed, and there is the point of innovation and human resource cadre. I think this is from my viewpoint as private sector, I think this is very important and can play a great role, and I hope that people take this issue seriously and follow up on it. Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim. What I would like to say that I'm very glad to be part of this debate and discussion, and I'd like to thank my colleagues here, and I have learned a lot from this debate and discussion, and I'd like to thank my colleagues here, and I invite them to visit us at the National Center for Information so we can make benefit of their expertise. But I would like to explain something. When I talked about this personal benefit, I'm not talking about the personal things, but when a government department earns money for providing information to another department, that is the issue. Dr. Ghada and Engineer Sarah and Mr. Marwan Rashid and Engineer Buthaina, thank you very much. Sarah, first, I'm very happy that we are having this discussion. I don't think in all sectors that we have come from, we don't usually have such type of discussion. I think this is a very useful discussion, and actually it's too late. It should have happened before, but I'm very happy to be part of this debate and discussion of this forum. To be part of this forum, I really like the nature of discussion, and now I think people, they know about the issues. Once they know about the issues, I think they can fix them. So if you want to really develop the country, the ICT is the way forward, I think. And it is a long-term involvement, and they are enablers. They can act as enablers, and they can act as they can help the inclusion, and they can empower the economy. I think this is what I want to stress here, and it's not only talk, but we should take action based on what we have discussed here. Same feeling I had. I am having a great time here being part of this discussion and of this being part of this forum. We have learned a lot from each intervention, and the lack of data, I would like to highlight it. So it's impacting us in the R&D research. So I cannot take an arbitrary sample and just work on it, such as determining that software companies are doing so and so. I think we need to do some sensors as applied by some sectors. So I think the private sector, sometimes people say that the private sector should not get involved, and people say that the academia should be part of the sensors, because academia, they are neutral and they have comprehensive knowledge, and they are not part of any business sector. So I think this will be very interesting census. So when we do the census, when the sanctions are lifted, finally, when the companies, foreign companies come for investment, so we should have information and data as generated from this census in place. What I would like to say that those companies who have made successes, they have actually a body or a ministry for ICT. So we need to have a body that regulates ICT. We need to have a box, central box for information, central bank for information. We have to raise awareness, social awareness about ICT, and we have to, everybody has to be involved within the society. What I would like to stress that we need to sit together and look at the map of Sudan and try to do some mapping out for the innovation initiatives in order to determine the structural issues that should be reformed and the restraints and the government issues. Who is out there, what are the elements, and what are the interactions. So these are the aspects that we need to explore and we need to fix, and we can just like make something that make us ready or create readiness for the coming opportunities. Last thing is that as we mentioned the culture. So this information centers, people are very suspicious about these information centers, including the National Center for Information. So I think we have to have a change of culture in this regard. Maybe we can change the name, because people are very suspicious and they are about this of this information centers, and I think it's like something security-wise or something, which is very sad actually. Dr. Sarah, sometimes Dr. Sarah, she wants to reflect, or she wants to show that I am her senior. Thank you, Doctor. I think our National Center for Information, our plan A, if the cabinet turned us into a ministry and there is a cooperation between the government components, for us will be like we'll be supervising the digital transformation within Sudan. I am the first civil general director of the National Center for Information, and until now I cannot get used to the people calling you your excellency, or like I'm a commanding officer or something. So like this concludes our session. I'd like to thank you for participating in this forum and for your valuable interventions. Thank you all audience online, and good night. Thank you.